And we are back on WFNC 640 AM. We are coming to you live, and we are talking real estate with Team Harris, and I am your host, Wendy Harris. Right here in Fayetteville, North Carolina, sitting in our offices right on Hope Mills Road. Happy to be here with you today. And today we are discussing some of the top scam examples in the state of North Carolina. The North Carolina Real Estate Commission has put out the scam warning. These types of scams are happening. They are very, very real. And oh my gosh, the creativity behind them is astounding sometimes. It makes my heart hurt. I wish we could take all of these creative people and funnel them towards good. I mean, because they're putting some energy into this, you know? So the first one is probably the least complex of all of them. It is the for sale by owner who's not the owner. Really quite a straightforward situation. So this is one example of this scam as reported to the Real Estate Commission. So this one had to do with a parcel of land. A neighbor happened to be driving by who lived near the land, saw a for sale by owner sign on it and knew the people who own the land. And instead of calling the number on the sign, they actually just picked up their cell phone. They called the owner of the land and said, "Hey, are you selling your land?" And of course the owner said, No, we're not selling the land. We're not selling the land. So the owner called the police, reported the situation. The police went and took the sign down and of course investigated, right? Worked real hard to figure out what's going on there. So this is not unusual, though. That's an example of it. But yeah, you've got to be really, really careful with for sale by owner signs, particularly if they are vacant land, what might be a vacant or an abandoned house, or the house could be being lived in. But be very aware that the people living in the house may not actually be the owners of the property. So just be really careful with for sale by owner signs. You need to really do your due diligence to make sure if you're going to approach a for sale by owner that you're actually dealing with the owner. We'll talk about some ways to figure out who these people really are as well, because it's important. All right, so that is one of the scams happening in North Carolina. We have another scam happening in North Carolina that is going around, and this is also a seller situation, but this is where a fake seller actually contacts an agent. They actually call a realtor. They call a realtor and they list the property for sale. So here's an example of this happening. Listing agent receives the call from an owner. In this situation, this is still a vacant lot, okay? Vacant land is interesting because no one lives there. It might be less likely that people are familiar putting, faces with who actually owns the property, but this can also happen on houses. I'm just reading you another example of some land, okay? So this was just a lot in a new subdivision, okay? So listing agent received a call from an owner wanting to sell a lot in a new subdivision. Listing agent they did due diligence. They pulled the deed, they verified the names, made sure everything that they were being told was on the up and up. And then they sent the listing out for digital signatures because a lot of times our sellers are not in the area. So we don't get to meet them in public or in person. We don't get to meet them in person. So they sent the forms out for digital signatures. The signatures were received. The agent went and put a sign in the yard of the lot. This again, lucky situation. A neighbor was suspicious, and the neighbor knew the actual owner of the lot and called the owner, and the owner said it was not for sale, contacted the listing agent. Oh my goodness. So the rightful owner actually showed up, called the agent, and the sign was removed. So the sign had been in the yard for 3 days. I mean, in 3-day period, the lot could have been sold. Fortunately, it wasn't. But here's the kicker. Okay, the line was removed. Later that day, the property was relisted by another broker in the area who put their sign in the yard. Insane. It happened again to the same lot on the day that the other listing was terminated and the sign was picked up. The second realtor or broker listing agent was alerted to the issue with the fraud, and those owners now have to go to that lot daily to see if the property is listed for sale with a sign in the yard, check the MLS, or is on any for sale by owner sites. I mean, this is a determined people, right? Yeah, scary how someone so easily, and you're saying, well, how could somebody sell it? Well, they may not get to closing with it, but in the process, they're going to be, there's going to be issues. And oh my gosh, who knows? So how do you stop? How do you get around it? It's crazy. Okay, here's there's another fake seller one. We'll do a fake seller one, and this is kind of that next step. If you don't catch it right away, if you don't have that nosy neighbor, and when I say nosy neighbor, I use it as a compliment. I love a nosy neighbor. I love it in my own neighborhood. Now, I'm not talking about peeping toms, that type of stuff. I'm just talking about that neighbor who pays attention. That neighbor who, I have neighbors like this. I love them. They recognize everybody who's supposed to be on the street. They know what's happening with the people on the street. They're just connected, and they watch out for things. These are also the wonderful neighbors who are willing to grab your mail for you when you're out of town, pick up packages if they're dropped off on your porch. They are just fantastic neighbors. Love, love, love a nosy neighbor. Well, those first two situations were resolved quickly because of nosy neighbors. But what happens if that doesn't really happen? So here we go. So a fake seller, so someone claiming to own a property, listed a property for sale, and there were multiple offers on the property. It is, and this was during the coming soon period. Okay, the coming soon period, there were multiple offers. A buyer went under contract and delivered a large due diligence fee because they were participating, competing offers. And so because of that, the value went up, the due diligence fee went up. The buyer delivered the due diligence fee. In this situation, they actually wired it directly to the seller's account. Okay, that's the thing now that's happening, right? Oh, can you just Zelle me the money? Can you just, Venmo me the money, right? The due diligence fee. If you've been in real estate, you've heard about that happening. Well, guess what? As soon as that seller had that money, never heard from again. Turned out, seller wasn't the seller. Now, these people are using all the correct information. They're using the right names. They are, matching the deeds with the owners on record. They are doing all this kind of stuff. But this seller was never heard from again because this seller was not a seller. This seller was a scam artist. Please be careful. Please be careful. Another one, this is a fake buyer. Okay. Very, very interesting one. So fake buyer, and here's an example of this. Again, remember, these are not just one-off times they're happening. I'm just giving you an example of them. So now, the fake buyer dodging the due diligence, fee payment, okay? A homeowner received a job transfer. They listed their house for sale. Okay, so an actual owner listed their house for sale on the market. The seller received a full price offer on the first day with a quick closing. Nothing unusual about that. Nothing strange, nothing unusual, but it was going to be a cash offer. They were going to close really quickly. The seller was already out of the house or just about to be out of the house. It was just perfect timing. Seller contracted to sell the property immediately. And they went ahead and purchased a house in their new town. okay, because they had to get into a place to buy. So they went under contract for a house where they were moving, and they actually paid a due diligence fee on that new property that was equal to the due diligence fee they had just received on their property. I mean, that makes sense, right? Let's say they received $10,000 or $20,000. They had a contract for that. And then they wrote an offer on another property, just saying, we're going to take that due diligence money and we're going to use it for this property over here. But here's the situation. Because everything was done electronically, the due diligence fee was going to be delivered, okay? Not being Venmo'd, not being Zelled, right? But the due diligence fee was being delivered. Well, the buyer made one excuse after another. And the seller was even told that the buyer was sorry and offered to raise the sales price by $25,000 if the seller would wait until closing to get the due diligence fee. Okay, so buyer very communicative, okay, buyer very frustrated, or saying they're very frustrated. They haven't had, whatever, had issues with delivering the due diligence fee, but it's a quick close. If you just wait until closing, we'll actually give you $25,000 more for the purchase of the house. And everyone was okay. We're like, okay, we can make that work. The seller goes to the attorney's office to sign the deed. Okay, to sign all the settlement documents. So this is closing. And it was only when that seller arrived at the attorney's office that the seller learned that the buyer wasn't real. The buyer was not real. And the buyer, this fake buyer, was actually attempting to get the attorney to wire proceeds of the sale to them. Okay. So this was all going to be like a wire fraud thing going on. It was nuts, crazy. And even worse than this, the seller was unable to purchase that new home that they went under contract for in the town they were living for. They lost all of that due diligence money, and they were at risk of losing their job as well because they weren't able to relocate. Okay. It is horrible. And because the seller lost all that due diligence money that he put on the house that he was going to buy, and he didn't sell the house that he had on the market for sale, he wasn't able to make the mortgage payments on that property. He'd lost all of his cash. It was a horrible situation, just awful. And that's a complex one. That's a really complex one. These are the types of things that are happening, and they're happening all over the country. But the ones I'm speaking to are just disclosed from the Real Estate Commission. These here in North Carolina. But we've got to be more careful. We've got to be more careful. We've got to be smarter in the way that we do business. So, what are some things that we can do? How do you keep yourself from being scammed? Really, how do you prevent this stuff from happening? These people are they're such good actors. They're truly committed to these roles, and they know how real estate happens. They know how real estate takes place. And of course, some of the things we do still need to be done, verifying information, verifying deed records, and those types of things. But we're working in more and more of a digital world. But even if you're in person, people can say they're someone who they're not. I think what we're going to be moving forward, certainly here at Team Harris, we're putting systems in place. Immediately, as soon as I read this report, we started working on new policies and procedures for it. And one of the things I think you're going to be finding is that now, whenever you work to purchase or sell a property, that, if you're a buyer or seller out there, don't be surprised to be asked for a photo ID. Okay. Do not be surprised to ask for a photo ID. And in order for realtors to protect themselves and to have coverage from their insurance if things going awry, a photocopy of that photo ID is going to be very important to keep in your file to prove that you asked for a photo ID, a government issued photo ID, right? It's, attorneys ask for it. They ask for 2 forms. One's got to have a photo on it, and then anything else. It can be a debit card, it can be a credit card, it can be whatever you want, but you've got to have 2 cooperating pieces of identification in order to close on a transaction at an attorney's office. I see at the very least a government issued ID for real estate. For real estate transactions, but starting with when you meet your realtor. But if you're dealing with a for sale by owner or something like that, you may still want to do the same thing as well. You know what? I want to meet you in person. If at all possible, if I can't meet you in person, I want to do a Zoom meeting. I want to do some type of virtual meeting where I can see you, but I also want to see that government issued ID. I want to see it. I want to know who I'm dealing with. I want to know who I'm talking to. All right. We've got some other red flags that you can look out for. But for right now, we're going to go to a quick break on WFNC 640 AM. We are talking real estate with Team Harris, and I am your host, Wendy Harris.